Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. It's Thursday, which means it's time for our weekly redraft. I say it every week. We started in 2020. We've worked our way all the way down to 2009 last week. So we were looking at the 2008 draft. When looking at this draft, this was the initial order: Stamkos, Doughty, Bogosian, Pietrangelo, Schenn, Filatov, Wilson, Bodker, Bailey, Hodgson. So when looking at it, only really 3 stars within this top 10. Josh Bailey was a solid player for a while. Bodker had a couple decent years. Luke Schenn's still playing in the NHL, and Bogosian as well, but nothing really special. So there's going to be a lot of names that fell out of the top 10 that are obviously going to be in this redraft. Let's get right into it. Obviously, the first one is kind of an obvious one. Tampa Bay Lightning initially took Steven Stamkos. I have them still taking Steven Stamkos. I'm not really shocking everybody with this. When looking at Stamkos in his prime, I feel like kids nowadays forget just how good he was in his prime. Obviously, won 2 Rocket Richard trophies, was the runner-up for the Hart Trophy, scored 60 in a season back when the goal-scoring rates were like 2.7 goals per game by a team. Now it's like goddamn 3.1, 3.2. So era-adjusted, that's like 66 or 67. He was an absolute beast, and he somehow had fantastic longevity despite having a lot of pretty scary, serious injuries in his career. Obviously broke his leg back in 2013. 2017 only played 17 games. 2020 was dealing with a serious core injury. And despite that, 2 years ago, the guy's still putting up 106 points, 42 goals, 64 assists. He has kind of not fallen off, but he has decreased since that 106-point season. Was point per game last year, slightly below point per game this year, but still at 33, 34 years old to be playing at the high level that he is. And when looking at the Tampa Bay Lightning, obviously they're not going to change anything when looking at Steven Stamkos being their franchise player for basically the last 15 years. As a result, did win 2 Stanley Cups. He wasn't the best player on those teams, but was a massive piece, and as well also making 2 other Stanley Cups. So they don't change anything. I think Steven Stamkos just overall is the best player in this entire redraft, in this entire draft. So he goes first overall still. Second overall, LA Kings. It's a tough one. It's a really tough one. But I have them going with Erik Carlson. I know you can make the argument saying, oh, they won 2 Stanley Cups with Drew Doughty. You don't touch that. But still, I just think Erik Carlson was the best defenseman in the NHL for almost basically half a decade. When looking at him from 2012 to 2017, he won 2 Norrises, had 2 other Norris runner-up seasons. This guy was a generational offensive talent. I understand that, yes, they did win 2 Stanley Cups. You probably don't want to touch that, but I think the talent gap is that much in their prime. I think Erik Carlson was just straight up better than Drew Doughty, as well as obviously in the 2020s. He did have some down years with the San Jose Sharks, but wins a Norris last year. I think he's actually having a pretty good season this year. When looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're just a train wreck overall, but I think Erik Carlson is just such a special offensive talent. And I know, yeah, again, back to the Stanley Cups. He won the goddamn Norris in 2012. I think they probably would have still won the goddamn Stanley Cup that season, and maybe don't win in 2012 and 2014, but maybe they win in 2011, maybe they win in 2016. I still think that they definitely win a Stanley Cup 2, maybe even 3. So I think Erik Carlson going second to the LA Kings just makes sense. Third, the Thrashers, they get Drew Doughty. When looking at Drew Doughty, was a pretty elite guy right out of the rip. 2010 was a Norris finalist, finished 3rd basically from 2010 all the way up until around 2018. But 2010 all the way up to like 2016 when he won the Norris, was a top 5 defenseman in the entire NHL. Post 2018, did have a bit of a fall off. Still has been a number 1 guy, absolutely chewing up minutes. He plays 25 minutes this year. He's playing like 26 minutes a night. Still has been a number 1, but his play has definitely dipped since that 2018 season when I believe he was a Norris finalist. But still, no doubt, first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the best defensemen of the entire 21st century. And the Thrashers get him. Maybe they don't end up moving because he's so good in 2010, 2011. They actually make the playoffs or something. In a different world, maybe the Thrashers are still in Atlanta. Number 4, you probably know who it is if you know this draft. Roman Josi going to the Blues instead of Alex Pietrangelo. Roman Josi, the last 5 years, he's been by far better than Drew Doughty and Erik Carlson. I definitely understand why someone could maybe make an argument for Roman Josi at number 2, considering he's been better the past 5 years and going forward the next 3 to 4 years. I would probably project Roman Josi being better as well, but Roman Josi did take a while to get into the NHL, while Carlson won the Norris in 2012, was a top pairing guy basically right out of the rip. Drew Doughty, obviously, 2010, 3rd in the Norris. When you look at Roman Josi, he debuted in 2012 with 16 points in 52 games. 2013, 18 points in 48 games. He was a bottom pair, second pairing guy until finally then he put up 40 points the following year. And then from then on out, he was a top 15, top 10 defenseman from 2015 to 2019. He was a legit top 10 defenseman, set 274 points in 391 games, finished 5th for the Norris twice, 7th for the Norris another 2 times in that 5-season stretch, and he somehow elevated his game past that, won the Norris in 2020, and in 2022 was the runner-up, having 76 points in 75 games right now. But again, I think when looking at Carlson and Doughty, that were day one impact guys and day one superstars for the most part, and still are number one defensemen, I am going to go with them over Roman Josi. He goes to the St. Louis Blues. They get their franchise defenseman instead of Alex Pietrangelo, who was also fantastic for them. But at number 5 to the Leafs instead of Luke Shen, I almost said Braden Shen, I have Alex Pietrangelo. When looking at Pietrangelo, he debuted in 2011 with 43 points, and by year 2, finished 4th in the Norris with 51 points. From then on, basically for a decade up until maybe a season or two ago, he was around the top 5 to 10 maybe defensemen in the entire NHL every single season. A solid around 50 points, very solid defensive numbers. Led the St. Louis Blues to a Stanley Cup, obviously, in 2019. Has been the number one guy for the most part in Vegas, helped lead them to a Stanley Cup. So in looking at Pietrangelo, I don't think he's going to sniff the Hall of Fame unless they maybe win another Stanley Cup and he can play deep into his 30s. Like I think Roman Josi, Drew Doughty, Erik Carlson are Hall of Famers, but he is definition of Hall of very good, has had a fantastic career, and is going to be one of the better defensemen that ended up not making the Hall of Fame. Number 6, the Jackets initially took Filatov, who was a massive bust. I have them taking John Carlson. I'm looking at John Carlson from 2011. He was a very solid top pairing offensive defenseman. 2011 to 2017, he was a very solid top pairing defenseman, but nothing really special. But 2017, basically until 2022, he was one of the best offensive defensemen in the entire NHL. It was an insane offensive peak. He was kind of an all offense, not a ton of defense guy, but the offense was there. 328 points in 361 games over those 5 years, 75-point pace. Obviously finished second in the Norris in 2020. A lot of people argue that he should win. I understand why Roman Josi won. He was better defensively, but he finished second. I believe he had a 4th place finish, a 5th place finish during that 5-year stretch. Over that 5-year stretch, just looking at that, there's an argument that he was like the 4th or 5th best defenseman in the entire NHL. Since then, his numbers have kind of peeled back a little bit, in part just because Washington's core on the whole has gotten old, but I'd say he's still a low-end number 1 and going to be a very solid player for another 2 to 3 years. Seventh, the Predators initially took Colin Wilson. I have them taking another defenseman. I have them taking Jared Spurgeon. When looking at it, they obviously do not have Roman Josi, considering he's going 4th overall to the St. Louis Blues. So they get a defenseman in Jared Spurgeon, a guy that I think you can make a serious argument has been one of the most underrated players of the entire decade. He's an absolute advanced stats, analytical darling every single year, posting up in like the top 10% of even strength offense and defense. He doesn't have the offensive firepower of the 5 defensemen ahead of him. That's why I have him at 7, but he's obviously the best defensively out of the bunch, just fantastic defensively, playing 22 to 23 minutes a night every single year for the past 10, 12 years. Just Mr. Reliable for the most part, but yeah, lacks the offense in order to be higher ahead of some other guys. And obviously this year had a pretty serious injury. It's going to be interesting to see how he bounces back from that, but I'm pretty confident in his spot at number 7. Number 8, the Coyotes initially took Bodker. I have them taking Jordan Eberly. They get another winger. And when looking at Eberly, he's really just Mr. Reliable. He's been a good top 6 forward basically since he walked into the league. Put up, I believe, 46 points in 68 games or something like that. Then the following year, he did have one insanely elite year, 34 goals, 42 assists, 76 points. But basically since then, it's been around 60, 65 point pace. Even late into his 30s, he's put up very solid numbers. He has 700 career points, which is very impressive. There's a realistic chance that Jordan Eberly finishes with 900. I don't think he's going to get to 1,000. He still needs 300, and he is turning 34 in a month. But he's going to finish like 900 career points. He never really was a star, but he was just a fantastic winger, top-line winger for a lot of seasons, and even late into his career has been a very, very good second liner for the most part. So Jordan Eberle, again, doesn't wow you, doesn't jump off the paper similar to a Jared Spurgeon, but just Mr. Reliable every single season. Number 9, the Islanders initially went with Josh Bailey. I have them taking Braden Holtby. When looking at Braden Holtby, he had one of the greatest 3-year stretches by a goalie. I wouldn't say NHL history, but definitely the 21st century. Over 3 years, he had 201 wins, 131 losses, 42 overtime losses, a 923. Not a single season below a 922. He went 922, 923, 925, and 2.17 goals against. Obviously, won the Vezina one of those years, finished second in one of those years, but he was a superstar goalie over 6 years. For 6 years, he was a consistent, very good starter with those 3 other elite years, obviously mixed in. So when looking at it,
He was an absolute stud. I know he didn't have that much longevity. He still finished like 299 wins. But for the New York Islanders, they get their franchise goalie. And maybe the John Tavares Islanders end up going on a run if they have Braden Holtby in net instead of like the Grice Halak goalie tandem. I love those guys. But obviously, Braden Holtby would have been a massive upgrade for my New York Islanders, and it would have been very interesting to see how they would have fared with him. Next up, I spoiled it. Jacob Markstrom heading to the Vancouver Canucks for Cody Hodgson, who not for Cody Hodgson. Cody Hodgson initially went to the Vancouver Canucks. I have Jacob Markstrom here. Markstrom was a late bloomer when looking at him. He wasn't a full-time starter until 2018, but since then he's had two kind of Vezina-level seasons, 2022 with the Flames and I believe 2020 or 2019 with the Vancouver Canucks, as well as some other very solid seasons as a starter. Wasn't not the consistent prime of a Braden Holtby, but Braden Holtby obviously started out a lot earlier. Markstrom does have some more longevity on him, considering he's still playing some pretty solid hockey. And if he gets traded to a different team, he maybe could be in the Vezina conversation next year. So I got him going to the Canucks, where he obviously ended up for a stretch with the Canucks, and they get their guy. Could have been they obviously had Demko back then, but this is where I'm not taking Demko into account, considering in my 2014 redraft, he went somewhere else. So the Vancouver Canucks get Markstrom, who's their guy from like 2018 on, and has been a very solid player. When looking at some honorable mentions, Jake Allen, Adam Henrique, Josh Bailey, Gustav Nyquist, nothing really jumps off the page. I think my top 10 makes a lot of sense of Stamkos, Carlson, Doughty, Josi, Pietrangelo, Carlson, Spurgeon, Eberly, Holtby, Markstrom. Let me know in the comments. What do you think about this? Who would you move up? Who would you move down? Who would you take out? And who would you put on? I'll be seeing you in the next one.